guarantee you there's nowhere in the world. I came out while I was peeing in the urinal. That came to me.
Yeah, I would love to like really. I tried and tried and tried and tried, and I can't do it. Just not there.
I'll think of one. I think with a knock joke, you got to start at the punchline and work your way back.
Probably
to how you get there.
Probably.
I'm trying to think of.
I watched a new documentary. There's a new documentary on Netflix called "The Man with 1,000 Children."
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a true story. Man with 1,000 Children, and that documentary should be called "Oh, Skeet 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 Skeet." That joke really hit hard at an actual comedy club. See, you can't do comedy on here. It's super weird.
What is that?
I don't know. But...
They've taken everything from me.
Oh, I hit the crickets button and it wasn't crickets.
What was that?
I think that was from the Luke Mitchell.
Oh, it was,
case.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's so long ago.
I know. Wow, how are these things I still have loaded up in here?
Oh, yeah, I saw that Jillian and Patrick covered that on True Crime Obsessed, but I didn't listen.
What, the Luke Mitchell case?
No, the man with 1,000 kids. Pretty gross documentary, to be 100% honest. Real gross.
Yeah, I didn't.
Real gross. It's about a guy that is they call him a mass donor, but he was also like, not only did he donate to sperm banks, he donated private donations, is what he called them. Yeah. So
what does that mean?
It would just be like a couple that was like wanted to have a kid, and he would just like give them a donation in a cup, and they would go like turkey baster route.
Oh, I thought it just like pork their wife.
No, at least not that I saw.
That can't be the right word to use there.
At least not that I saw. He traveled all over the world. They think he's admitted to having 600 children, and they think it could be as high as 3,000.
That's insane.
Yeah.
How's everybody doing? We're back here. This time I get right on when Zach is talking about sperm banks. Last time it was bourbon. Who's passing out their seed? See, all these things. I feel like you can start with any one of those and reverse engineer a knock joke.
I just am not smart enough.
I think we get. Listen, I think this is a challenge. Next week,
Jay Hill. It's not P Diddy. It's I can't remember the guy's name. Doesn't matter.
Next week for the pregame for the patrons, we each come in with 3 original knock jokes.
All right, I'll go for it.
3 knock jokes.
3 knock jokes
Have to be original.
3 knock jokes.
I feel like
you know what the worst part is? We're not going to tell JV, and she'll come up with 3 off the top of her fucking head that are probably better than everything.
That's not fair. She's an improviser.
I know.
That's her job. We're fire teacher, podcaster, quail farmers, tattoo artists.
That's you. I'm not any of those.
You're a podcaster.
I am a podcaster. I grew 1 stalk of corn on accident one time last summer.
Caroline, you're on vacation next week. That means you can't be on YouTube. What does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
I feel like you should still be here. I mean,
they have YouTube on vacations.
Yeah, YouTube goes with you. It's on your phone. It's on all over the place. I know you guys don't understand how technology. Who's giving me shit about technology earlier?
I don't know.
Oh, we should start this show here pretty quickly, because here's the thing. I'm telling myself right now, as much as I absolutely don't want to, that I'm going to go watch the freaking debate.
You're not doing it.
But what I'm probably going to do is turn on another episode of Bad Monkey and try to watch that before bed.
I'm going to try to get home before my kids go to sleep.
That'll be planned. So with that being said, I guess we can get this thing started. So we're going to end the pregame. Pregamers, we love you guys. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Goodbye.
All right, we're ready to fire up this thing?
Ready. We don't got to clap. This is not fun. Ahoy, friends. Thank you for tuning into Truth and Justice. You are listening to the Friday Follow-Up for Season 15, Episode 14, The Pattern of Behavior. This week, Bob went over a handful of cases that highlighted the Benton Harbor Police Department's pattern of corruption, and it merely scratched the surface. JV is on assignment this week, but Bob and I are in studio and here to answer your questions. But before we get started, do we have any housekeeping?
I don't think that we do. No, I don't think we do. I mean, everything is just moving along. We'll talk about next week's episode at the end. No, I think we can get right into this one. I don't think we have a whole lot of questions. We don't have JV here this week, so it's just me and Zach. So I guess first thing first, what did you think when you heard? Did anything jump out you in particular about this episode?
Truthfully, sadly, no. Nothing really jumped out at me because I grew up here. I grew up literally across the river in St. Joe, and you heard about these stories. You heard about them, my entire life I heard about these stories. I worked in Benton Harbor in 2003, about a mile and a half from where the riots were.
Okay.
So I mean, none of that's really jumped off the page as anything crazy, but I also understand that that's not the world we live in. That's just this one little area.
Mm-hmm.
So it is weird. But I mean, I remember the riots in 2003. It was crazy to me because, again, we were right there. I worked on Riverview Drive, which, like I said, is about a mile and a half from where the riots were.
Uh-huh.
And I worked in a business called Heathkit Educational Systems, which was actually in an old Kmart building downtown, right there on Riverview Drive.
Okay.
And they turned half of it into the office I worked in, and the other half into a charter school. And the riots happened in June, right at the end of the school year, and they ended up closing the school early and using the school as like the police used it as their riot headquarters. So I mean, every day we would show up to work, and it would just be hundreds of cop cars in the parking lot, and there was a armored people mover, helicopters.
Yeah, I was a fireman in Niles at the time,
Mm-hmm.
which is the same county. So, but I was friends with a lot of those guys up in Benton Harbor and St. Joe firefighters that were trying to fight it because there was all the houses. I think there were 7 houses burned down.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to my buddy Pete and telling him, like, we tried to roll up to a house fire and they're throwing bricks at the fire trucks. Like, we had to pull out of there. The houses are just burning to the ground. It was crazy.
Yeah, the civil unrest. I mean, and it was just years in the making. I mean, and this episode kind of shows you the pattern of how they got there. I mean, I hopefully would like to say it's gotten better, but I don't know how much it's gotten better in there either.
Yeah, I don't know. And that's what I try to talk about a little bit at the beginning. I mean, I was in pretty bad shape when I made that episode last week. But we have a problem now in Benton Harbor. The community doesn't trust the police. The police are extremely busy trying to run around all sorts of calls all the time. There's just no connection there between the two. We have this bad situation in that compound. We have got people policing themselves. You got people with guns. They're not investigating these crimes. There's got to be animosity that's going both ways. But part of this is like understanding like where that came from. Like, I've talked to people about it that don't really fully understand. And it goes all the way back to, the 20s about how it originally started. But even now, when the people in the community, there's this whole concept. I've recommended it before. I recommend it again, a book called Ghetto Side. One of our listeners recommended it to me and I read it. It's a great book that really talks about what it means to be over policed and under policed in these inner city communities. And it's like, if it comes to one of the people that lives there getting murdered, they almost look at it. It seems like the police almost look at it like that's one less person I got to deal with. They don't care if they get the right person. They don't really investigate. But they will be working. They will harass them and arrest them constantly for, especially when marijuana was illegal.
Mm-hmm.
They knew that most people they could pull them over, grab them, stop and frisk them, throw them in jail for weapons, and then they're all on probation because they keep getting trapped in this cycle of this system. And so it has created this community it's in pretty rough shape, but also is created there's more animosity towards the police. And then the police are busy. Like, I don't want to discount that, because I'm not saying like every cop in Benton Harbor is a bad cop. There's plenty of good cops there, and a lot of, they're just, if you listen to like a police scanner, they're running constantly. They are busy, and I'm sure they're fed up. But they have to understand too that they help make this problem. That the few, those are just a couple of examples. The documents I have up on the website now. Caroline transferred stuff from being into a slideshow into like a long PDF. I think it's a 37-page PDF of a bunch of these different incidents laid out in a timeline. It's on the website. I think it's the document is called like BHPD background or something like that. It's a PDF that's on our website in the case docs. You can read about them. But you got to understand that the people that are getting picked up and harassed and arrested constantly, thrown in jail, out on probation, picked up again, constantly, any little thing they do, they're getting picked up for. And then they're reading in the newspaper that there are cops that are getting arrested for DUIs, domestic violence. In the one instance we talked about, that killed a man.
Mm-hmm.
It was obviously it was a mistake, But if you or I, or more importantly, somebody else from that community ran over somebody in the middle of the road and drug them down there, I guarantee you they would have a lot more troubles than a $209 fine. So they're reading about the people that are what they feel are harassing them seem to be getting away with murder. It just continues to compound the problem. I think that if there's going to be any change in the city of Benton Harbor for the better, it has to start from that top. And it's not going to be easy. I'm not here to say that, oh, if the cops just get their shit together, that everything will be kumbaya. I don't think it will be. I think it's going to be a process, but it has to start with leadership in a police department that cares about the community and demonstrates every day that they're there to protect them and serve them. And I think over time they can bridge that gap. But there's been a lot of damage done over the years to get us here.
And I mean, this area too, we've talked about it at length, I feel like too, but there is like the racial element here. It's a racial hotbed here. There's so much going on, and you hear like the white versus black, which I don't truly believe it is, but that's what gets portrayed a lot around here. So that's hard to deal with as well, especially growing up in a biracial family and watching some of that be pushed on us.
Yeah. What's interesting is Benton Harbor is that a lot of the police force are people of color. Dan McGinnis is black. A lot of these officers we're talking about. So it's not necessarily, you kind of hear all this stuff that goes on. Specifically, when we talk about some of the cases we covered, and you think of, oh, here's a bunch of white cops, going at, because of prejudice going after the black community, but there are a lot of times it's black cops going after the black community.
Yeah.
But so it's just like they still have this separation there that doesn't have anything to do with race. I'd say the thing that opened my eyes up the most, and it was something that Caroline caught right away and it told me about before I even read the document, was what we have 2 other cases where they had no evidence, appear to have alibis, and somebody says that there was as the victim was dying, they named their killer.
Yeah, that's movie-esque and crazy to me.
It was crazy enough to hear it in this case. And of course, in this case, we have Sonia Lucas saying that just absolutely wasn't true. That's not what happened. And I think you'll hear in this week's episode that's coming even more evidence that it absolutely wasn't true. It completely doesn't make sense. But then you hear, like, just in that little snapshot, there's 3 cases that this has happened in, when it's something that I think most people would think it would be pretty incredibly crazy thing to happen. It seems like that's part of their MO. And I think that it's the same thing. Again, we're going to get more of this weekend too, but like not recording the interviews. And I think you'll see this more again on Sunday and then the next week's episode as well. That is one of the base ways that these detectives were able to get away with a lot of what they get away with is they don't record the interviews, and then they can say whatever they want. They can literally write their own story. Like, I could sit here and interview you, Zach. You say X, Y, and Z, and I can write on my paper, Zach said A, B, and C.
Okay.
And then, because there's no recording of it, you go into court in front of a jury, and there's me, the officer of the law in my uniform, saying that this happened, and the guy in handcuffs over there saying something different happened, and who are they going to believe? And then it compounds itself, and it's the same thing. This is what happened to Jody in one way, is it compounds itself because then they make it look like they're changing their story. First of all, they can write into the story, well, he said this, then he changed it to this, and he changed it to this, and he changed it to this. We don't know if that actually happened or not. But then the defendant gets on the stand, and they're telling a different story. And then and they didn't just do it with the defendant. We heard like Sherelle Moore, several episodes ago. She said they said that you said this and you said this, and she said they're lying. That's not what I said.
Yeah.
So there was
in this episode, there was a case of that where I don't remember the individual's name, but there was the suspected robbery where they had left the $1,200 in the woman's pocket.
Right.
And then the woman recanted on the stand her whole story, and they ended up throwing the case out.
Right.
But I mean, I feel like that could have been spun as well. Like, even when she recanted on the stand, they could say, well, you're just trying to cover it.
They tried to. They absolutely tried to. If you read like the full article, they tried to discredit her. So the prosecutor puts her up because they had worked out this story, and then she got on the stand and said, I can't do this. This is what actually happened. I have no idea who killed that woman. And again, it was just like the story made absolutely zero sense the whole time. But again, it shows you the mentality of, we don't care if we get the right person. We just need to make an arrest. It seemed pretty obvious this person is not responsible for this crime, she says, again, just like Sonia Lucas says, just like Sherelle Moore said, that the detectives were pressuring them into creating a story that would help their narrative.
So I did have a question that kind of ties everything together, I think. Now, there's so many names, and I may be getting confused, but one of the first cases you talked about in this episode, the defendant was Andre Williams. Is that the same? Do we have an Andre? Am I making that up?
No, we have Andre Williams.
Okay.
So this one, I was curious about that too, and I think Carolina looked at. I don't think so. This was Andre. So it was spelled Andrey.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's Andre. I don't know. Whereas our Andre Williams in our case is Andre, no Y at the end.
Okay.
So who knows? Because but they're also in our case, you have Andre Williams, Andre Blackwell, same guy. They just called him something different.
Yeah.
Because of the family connection.
And I thought that was the same name, but I wasn't sure if it was the same individual or what that was.
I don't think so. And I only say that because I've done a lot of background checking into Andre Williams, our Andre Williams, and some of the stuff that I'm not remembering off the top of my head what it was, but I feel like they were talking about a crime or being in jail or whatever, and it didn't seem to cross reference with our guy.
Okay.
With the timing of it. So do we? You have so we're a little out of sorts because Janet usually reads the questions, but now Zach is
have
here
the
to
list
do
of questions.
So let's go through them.
So the first question is from Jasmine, and I think we answered this, but I'm going to go through it anyways. It says, "Is the full rundown of the Benton Harbor police malfeasance up yet?" And they also say, "I hope Bob and Erica are feeling better."
Thank you. Erica's definitely feeling top notch. I'm feeling mostly better. I'm not 100% yet, but I'm getting there. Yeah. So like I said, it's up. It is. I think the file is called BHPD background. And then there's also another, it's like a PDF, but Caroline made a timeline of the leadership. You'll see it. It's like in color. I think it also starts with like BHPD. But it has like the mayors, the city managers, the police chiefs over the years when they took over, when they got fired, all in one like seamless timeline. That's up as well.
How far does this go? I believe it started like 95. Is that when she started? 95 to 2005?
She's in the chat, so she can answer that if she wants, because it went, I think I stopped at 2003 when I was recording the episode because my voice was going and I just couldn't go any further than that. I think she said she's made it up to 2006.
Okay.
I think I started in 95. It might have went a little bit before that too, or maybe she started at 95. But again, like even that period of time, I didn't hit all of them. I literally just picked, I wanted to talk about the ones with the dying declaration because those were directly related to our case, where witnesses came forward and said they were pressured to create and change a story by police. So I hit on some of those, but there's a whole bunch more in there. And there's kind of two sections. There's the stories of corruption within the department, and then there were the actual cases that were talked about. And to Janet's point last week, these are just the cases that like went to trial and there was media about them. Overwhelming majority of cases end up pleading out, so you don't even hear any of this stuff.
Yeah. And Caroline just said she's through 2009 right now. So, and there's so many.
Wow, that's crazy. So Caroline, is the document you sent me that I have out on the website, does that go through 2009 or is that one still through 2006? Whatever it is, when I'm sure she'll send me an updated file, and so I'll get that updated when we get more information.
All right. So next question is from Devin, and she asked, "Is there anything shared in this week's podcast that could potentially be indicative of reasons Jody believes that they were targeted / framed?"
No, I don't know that Jody was really aware of like the bigger picture, nor was I.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I've heard some stories. Obviously, the riot was a huge story, but that wasn't a case. That was just a case of some bad policing. The whole issue there was, and there was a build up to that case when the motorcycle crash happened.
Yeah.
And part of the issue was, if I remember correctly, they had a policy that they do not pursue high speed chases, particularly through residential neighborhoods. And they did it anyway, and it resulted in a death.
And I may be speaking out of pocket, and I cannot remember, but I feel like there was the other issue. There was some racial tension there because I do believe at that point it was white officers chasing a African American male on a motorcycle.
It definitely was. I mean, I know one of the officers that was chasing,
and I feel like that was a big proponent of why a lot of that started too. And we do have a question about that. Nicole says, "In the incident involving the high speed chase of the motorcycle, was the person who died the motorcycle rider?"
Yes. Yeah. So the police started chasing a motorcyclist, and they chase him through speeds of like 100 miles an hour through the neighborhood that we're working in right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what street it was on. I want to say, was it on Pavone?
It was on the corner of Pavone.
Yeah.
So
it's
which
like
is just, I mean, right there,
right around the corner from this crime scene. And yeah, the guy, the kid on the motorcycle ended up crashing into a house. They didn't make a turn and crash into
well,
the house.
and I think we talked about it, but I think that the house in question right now, the 784 Broadway, I believe was damaged in the riots. I don't think it wasn't burnt down, but I believe it was damaged.
No, I think it was burned down.
Was it burnt down during the riots as
so
well?
there was, in 2002, there was a fire where it
Mhm.
was damaged and it was condemned.
Okay.
And then in 2003, during the riots, it was burned down.
Oh, okay. So yeah, wow, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is from Joni. They ask, how does all this supposed corruption tie into Jody's case? I didn't hear any familiar names like McGinnis. And it says also domestic violence happens very often. Also, domestic violence happens very often with police as perps.
Yeah, Joni's always willing to give the cops a pass here.
Yeah.
So to answer the first part of the question, it's a culture thing. That's the point. Is it's a culture thing. And again, I would if you haven't yet, I would recommend anybody go back and listen to Andrew Collins' interview that I put up during season 15. It was a bonus episode. It was an interview I recorded a few years ago. But Andrew Collins was arrested. He got caught stealing and planting evidence. And then it when it came out that he was planting evidence on people, it ended up overturning, I think, 60 some convictions. People, basically every case that he touched, the convictions got overturned. And when he interviewed, he talked about that it was and that was he started in 2003. And he said when he got there, he went into the police department with his best intentions. So this is, he started there a few months after Jody's trial. So he went into, and he has a book out too. Derek said it's great. I haven't read it, but Derek, according to Derek, it's a great read. Derek, if you think about it, if you can put it in the chat what the name of the book is, I can recommend that. But he said, he became a cop because he wanted to help people. He wanted to protect and serve, all the cliche reasons you want to be a cop. And he says, as soon as he got into the department, that was not the culture. The culture there was that it was the police against the people, and they didn't care about them. They planted evidence on them. They set people up to get, they were incentivized for getting the most arrests, for closing these cases, to block people up. There's been a lot of talk and allegations that I've heard on the streets now that still goes on, that a lot of the police officers were involved in the drug dealing in the city, and that a lot of the drug arrests that happened within the city were the result of officers kind of taking out competition, like using the people in the community. And I approve of this. This is what people are telling me. That they would, so they would confiscate drugs from person A and send them to jail, steal the evidence, and then go give those drugs to somebody else to go sell for them, which they would get a cut of that. There was
that's crazy. If that in fact is happening, I mean, that is crazy to me.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, the name of his book is called "Convicted: A Crooked Cop, an Innocent Man, and an Unlikely Journey of Forgiveness and Friendship."
So I do know one name. The Takamoto does come up in the episode you talked about. I mean, it's a very brief. Didn't sound like you could find a lot on it, but he was brought up in there, and he's part of Jody's case.
Yeah, and I think he was fired at one point.
Was he?
Yeah, and also another name you're going to hear. So we heard a bunch of stories about an officer, Abdullah, who had he was involved in like 3 different scandals. That is the officer that went to Dan McGinnis's house on the night of Mario's murder to wake him up when he wasn't answering his phone.
Okay,
so he was still there. So there's a lot of overlap, but the big thing is the culture. And again, listen to Andrew Collins' interview. He talks about that was the culture. He got sucked into the culture, and it was him and one other guy, another cop there that got caught doing all this stuff. So that's how it's relevant. I'm sure you don't see it as relevant, but I see it as relevant, that if that is the culture that is going on there, if you have a dishonest police department that is targeting their citizens, not treating them like humans, and is breaking the law in order to make arrests and close cases, that 100% is relevant to Jody's case, because that's what happened here. I mean, to me, that it couldn't be any more clear cut that Jody has an alibi. He didn't do this. They didn't do this. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But they still, and my biggest frustration about Jody's case, and I know I keep harping on this, but my biggest frustration is that at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, they go to Dialos. Everybody knows what time the murder happened, what time they got off work. They talk to LaShawn Harper and they tell him this murder happened at this time and we're looking for Jody. And he says, what time did the murder happen? And he tells them, oh, there's no way he couldn't have done that. He was still here, is what Sean said at the time. He couldn't have done that. He was still here working at that time. They knew that in the first 6 hours of this investigation. They already knew that. And they nixed that from there. So now we're talking about, is the timesheet relevant? And we're going to, in a few episodes, we're going to talk about the testimony that came out a year later where people are trying to remember times. They knew that morning that Sean knew when and now you heard him when we talked to him. He doesn't remember the times, but he remembers they told him the time. And he knew what time they had just left several hours before that. And he knew that the overlap didn't work.
Yeah.
Already, right from the very beginning. So the culture does matter. And I don't know what you're getting at by saying that a lot of cops are perps of domestic violence. I don't know if you're saying that makes it okay or normal. But I don't know what to say to that.
I think they're getting at that it's not just unique to Benton Harbor.
Yeah, well, maybe not, but it doesn't help the situation.
Yeah, it doesn't change it.
It doesn't change the situation when the people, all these things came from newspaper articles. That's kind of the point I was making too. So the people who live in Benton Harbor, who are being policed by these people, are reading about them doing these things, getting arrested and getting away with it, and not even losing their jobs for doing it. And then the next day, when they just read about this person beat up his wife and got arrested and got let off, 2 days later, that person's arresting them for domestic violence, but they don't get off.
Yeah.
It affects the culture in both directions.
So I'll just kind of piggyback off this. Kathy says, it seems Benton Harbor attracts cops with bad intentions. Can the good people of Benton Harbor vote out the old regime and vote in a whole new one?
I think that's what needs to happen. It needs to happen above the police department. I think it needs to happen with the city commissioners. There's people out there, locals that have like radio shows and podcasts they do that just go that really, I can't remember what was the one guy. He's a reverend of some kind. I don't remember. But they just expose, they've accused the city commissioners and the mayor of stealing money, and they don't know where the money's going. I don't know if any of it, I haven't investigated any of that stuff. But the police chief isn't voted in. They're hired by the city council. And, look at this. In this case, I wrote to the city council telling them the issues I had, and none of them would even email me back. No response back from them at all. I think that if there's going to be a fix, it needs to be a whole new group of city commissioners that can then hire. I think there needs to be real close. And in my opinion, McGinnis needs to go. I've seen enough from him just in this case alone to know that I don't think he should be leading that department. And he's been the leader of this department for almost 10 years now. And over those 10 years, you've heard, this is not my words. You have heard from the community what their relationship is with the police department with him in charge. I think that needs to change.
So Stephanie asked this question, and we also have the question in the chat from Mike, and it's basically, what is there a higher up that the Benton Harbor police are reporting to?
The city council.
Okay. And nothing higher. I mean,
that's it. I mean, there have been a few times, and maybe going on now, where the state has sent down emergency managers to try to fix things there, and it just hasn't worked. And that's how, there were lawsuits filed. That's how, when McGinnis got his job, there was a city manager who McGinnis knew I think they'd gone to college together or something, that took over and kind of pushed out the old chief and then moved McGinnis up into that position.
And this is from like the state.
That's from the state.
The state appointed council.
Yeah, I think it was an emergency manager from the state.
And do you know how long that was in effect for?
It might still be in effect now.
Oh, wow. Wow. Let's see here. Sorry, Erica. I've been jumping around. Now I got to figure out what questions I ask, which ones I haven't. Liz says, you named a lot of names in part 1 of this week's episode. Can you give us a where are they now summary? Are a lot of these officers still on the job and might be listening?
I really don't know. Like Zach said, Takamoto's name came up. I know he's still there. But other than that, I'm not sure what everybody's doing now, who's still there and who's not.
And now the listener, Liz, also says, has any of them reached out for interviews, or have you reached out to any of them for interviews other than the one you already posted, which is Andrew Collins? And the listener says, this is the single best episode of any law enforcement related podcast I've ever heard. And says, seriously, I shared the episode with the director of Law Enforcement Academy where I work, and he now tells all his academics to listen. He now tells all his cadets to listen to that cautionary tale.
Well, those are very kind words. However good that episode was had nothing to do with me. Caroline Dwyer can get all the credit for that because she did all the research on it, and I barely mumbled through a fraction of it.
I will say, I think Liz is talking about the Andrew Collins episode.
Oh, that one?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
also,
all me.
Also, still really not you.
Right. Yeah.
That was Andrew Collins spilling his guts here.
Yeah. There was a lot to it. I hope it is too. I mean, when you consider the amount of incidents that Caroline has documented in that file that's on our website, and consider that this is a very small department that covers less than 5 square miles, it's insane that there's that many incidents of corruption that have gone on in that department. So as far as like it recruits cops with bad intentions, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think what it does is it recruits inexperienced cops because the pay is not as good. There's the city of Benton Harbor doesn't have a lot of money, so it's the same problem they have in the schools. You know, the Benton Harbor school, and that's another thing that needs to get better. As school of choice became a thing and the white flight happened, the money left the schools. The less students are there, the less money they get, and so the harder it is to get good teachers to come in and stay there. And good teachers, a lot of people use the school as kind of a stepping stone because they just need a job and then they get out of there, and it's just a cycle. It's the same thing with the police department. I mean, I think Andrew Collins' story is a really good it's a really good depiction of how this happens. Andrew Collins didn't become a cop because he wanted to be a crooked cop and he was looking for a department to be a crooked cop. He just wanted to be a cop because he wanted to help. And Benton Harbor was always shorthanded, and they didn't pay much, so he was able to get in there and get that job. And then he walks in as a young, impressionable person, new cop, and gets sucked right into it.
Well, and I think part of it too is exactly what you're saying. It's the idea that they are so understaffed and they are so overwhelmed that, while I'm not saying this is the correct mentality, they have the mentality of like by any means necessary.
Yeah.
So that, in the Andrew Collins interview, he says something along the lines of like, it started because he had chased an individual and the individual had thrown the dope.
Yep.
And he believed that dope was that individual's. And they said, well, unless you saw him do it, it's not going to stick. So you need to say you saw him do it.
Right.
And Andrew thought he was doing the correct thing. And I think that's a lot of it is they're trying to close these cases by any means possible. And possibly, I would guess that a lot of these guys think they're doing the right thing in most of these cases.
Well, there's a mentality too, and we've seen it even with Jody's case with some of our listeners who are bothered by the robbery incident, even Jody's version of the robbery incident, that because Jody held a gun to somebody had said, I think it was Joni who had asked that question, had said something like, well, even if Jody just committed the robbery, which they've admitted to being a part of, they should still do 8 to 40 years, so they're right where they belong anyway. It's that we're going to excuse this behavior by the police. We're going to excuse them framing something for something they didn't do. It's that whole idea that, well, they're guilty of something mentality, and I guess you could say it kind of along the same lines as you're talking about, where you feel like you're doing the right thing. They did something, so we're getting them off the street, but it's not okay. There's no excuse for it. It is never going to be okay. And that thing that Andrew Collins talked about, that incident you just referenced there, is that mentality. It is what feeds into all of this. When this new cop says I think he threw his dope, and they say, well, you have to have seen it. So say you saw it. And then he just said, that's the exact same thing we're seeing in this case with, with Sonia Lucas, with, with the sound test, with, Victoria says, I can't see out the windows because there's too much plastic. Well, then she has to change her story. Oh, no, there was no plastic, because she had to have seen it in order to make the case. It's the same thing. It's the same MO.
Yeah, that it is interesting. And I do think that like it's a thing over time too, right? Like Andrew Collins didn't just step in right away and have one incident and became this crooked cop. Like, I believe he started small, and then by the end you heard he was stealing money and he was doing all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But I don't think that wasn't a year in time. That was years in time before it happened.
Yeah. And I think one thing that compounds on it, and again, I touched on this last week too, is no one has ever cared. I think that has played a huge part in this, is that the more they did it and the more they got away with it, the easier it became to do it again. And the easier it became to push the envelope further, especially back in the early 2000s when Jody's case happened, where a lot of these other cases that I talked about on the podcast this week happened. They were doing these things, and there's one little newspaper article about it, and that's the end of it. Nobody gives a shit. Nothing's changing. Nobody's getting fired. Nobody's losing their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
They just move on to the next thing. It wasn't until, there's a federal investigation and they catch Andrew Collins that he got locked up.
So Teresa, aka Tool Girl, in the chat asks, is there any federal oversight that can be brought because of the civil rights violations?
I think there could be, but that's such a hard. I've actually had somebody from the DOJ reach out to me about this case. They've been listening, and essentially we have an avenue there when we get the full things packaged for, we have an inside that hopefully the DOJ can come in and do something. I don't know where this person's at in their position in there, but they work for the DOJ in Michigan. But that's what should happen. But there's so many of these complaints. It seems like you should be able to just say, hey, look at what they're doing here, and they'll come in and put a stop to it. But just like everybody else, they're overworked. They have so many. Every inner city in America has got situations and issues just like this.
So our last listener question, unless the chat comes up with any, is from Maureen. And they say, I've been wondering about the police connection to Mario's murder since the beginning. What are your thoughts on that? If I remember correctly, the type of gun used in the murder was not one commonly used in these type of cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a stretch. I don't know. I mean, I see a different scenario in my mind that is most likely. I'll just say that. I don't think that, that personally, I don't see any evidence that like a cop came in there and shot Mario and then blamed it. There's too many other things going on that I think to point in that direction. So
I have to agree. I think that's quite a bit of a stretch.
Yeah. I mean, when we see all this stuff, you have to think about it. But yeah, I just don't. I think there's another scenario that is far more likely.
Danielle in the chat asks, has there been any buzz about this investigation happening around Benton Harbor? Are the people aware of you now? I mean, besides the one you've spoken to?
Yeah. I don't know how far and wide stretch it is, but when the season came out and we started doing it, Angelique shared it with some people. Ayanna has shared it with some people, and there have been several people that have like kind of come out of the woodwork to them. That's how the new witness we talked about a couple weeks ago happened. They heard the story and heard the case, and everybody you talk to are just happy that somebody is doing something about in exposing the things that are happening with the police in that community. But what I talked to, Angelique, probably about a month ago, came out here and just, hung out in the studio for a couple hours just for us to chat for a little while. And, I told her, I was like, listen, but in order for real change to happen, the people, the community has got to rise up and make a stand. Like they can't sit back and be mad about it. We need to get groups and go to the city council meetings and make a stink. People need to run for office. We need to do things like that. And that's something Angelique is very passionate about trying to put together some kind of a movement to make a change within the community. But there's definitely a lot of talk within the community about what's going on. There's also definitely a lot of talk in the law enforcement community about what's going on. So I worked in public safety in this county for 15 years, 16 years. So I have a lot of the connections, and I keep hearing from cop friends of mine about things they're hearing. And it seems like so far nobody's super surprised when they're hearing, some of the stuff that it appears that McGinnis had done in this case during the investigation.
So we do have a question from Mike, and it says, does Benton Harbor have their own court, or is this nonsense not in a vacuum?
It's kind of in a vacuum. Benton Harbor does not have their own court. There's a Berrien County court, which is I don't know, mile and a half from where the crime scene's at right here. It's just right across the bridge from them. So yeah, it's handled by the county, but a large percentage of the cases running through that court system are from Benton Harbor.
Are there any more connections to Jody and McGinnis in trying to become a Mason?
I like I said, there's the Mason connection, and we see McGinnis's name as a personal reference on Jody's job applications. That's all I know.
All right. So let's see here. Sorry, Erica. All right. So that is all the listener questions, unless the chat comes up with anything else.
No, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up here. Short episode, short follow-up, but thank you guys for all of your questions this week. So for the next couple of weeks, this is the plan. So I'll let you guys know what's coming up. In this week's episode, we're going to be breaking down Dan McGinnis's trial testimony. So there's some good stuff that comes out of it, where we get a little better picture of what's going on with the crime scene, because instead of just reading these very vague reports, we get descriptions of things like the car, the lighting, things like that.
Oh, that's good. We've been wanting that.
Yeah, there's also some things that come out in there that I think when we cross-reference them, there's some pretty serious problems there. So this week we're going to hear McGinnis's testimony, including McGinnis's his description of what happened when Jody was interviewed as a suspect. So that interview was not recorded. So basically what happens is we get McGinnis's version of what Jody said, which then put Jody into a position, because a lot of people have asked in the beginning, they were kind of shocked that Jody testified in their own defense. Doesn't happen very often. That's why it happened, because there's no recording. It was just McGinnis saying these are the things Jody said, which put Jody into a position where the only way that they could try to defend themselves, things that they're saying that McGinnis was lying about, was to take the stand. So then next week, we're going to hear about Jody's testimony. Jody's full testimony, along with, and part of that is what Jody says they actually said during the police interview. And then after that, we're going to be getting into, so this is kind of the next 3 weeks. After that, we're going to be getting into all the alibi witness people that I've interviewed now. You've heard from LaShawn and Princella. We're gonna hear all of their trial testimony, everybody who kind of vouched for Jody and testified at trial about Jody's alibi. So that's what's coming up in the next 3 weeks. I do also want to tell you, I mentioned it in Sunday's episode, but I'll tell you guys again now, because I'm hoping to get some response from this pretty soon. I was talking to a friend of mine who is a state trooper who worked on this case, and I was talking about my frustrations about the lack of crime scene photos, lack of documents, lack of recordings, things like that. And he told me that because the Michigan State Police was involved with the homicide task force, they should have, and he said they will have, their own file on the case.
All right.
So I have on, I think Sunday, I filed through their portal an open records request with the Michigan State Police for their file. So fingers crossed, I'm hoping from the Michigan State Police file, which never went to the prosecutor, is not part of any of that. They just kept their own file, that it will at the very least have some crime scene photos. Perhaps we might have some recordings that we've been told don't exist, and maybe we get a little clearer picture of what was going on. So hopefully
if we could get that 911 call.
Right. That's the big, like, someone's got to have a transcript of that 911 call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So all of that's going on. So we got a lot happening in the next few weeks. And for now, we're going to go ahead and sign off, and we'll talk to you guys again next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody. Okay.
I was trying to remember how she did it. I couldn't remember.
Does she say bye, everybody, or she say thanks, everybody? I think she says thanks.
I don't remember now. That was good enough. Whoops, I just turned my flashlight on.
Oh, all right. Well, we're going to end this thing so Zach can go see his children before they go to bed. But thanks, everybody, for joining us, all 62 of you. And we'll talk to you guys next week. Bye.
Bye, guys.